Dave, a lot of people wouldn't look at us and think that we would have a lot in common, but I'm here to tell you that we do have at least one thing in common, which is that we have fallen off stages in front of large audiences. Yours was a little bit more than mine. Tell me about Gothenburg and Sweden.
Well, we were on a stadium tour, and we were there in Gothenburg. We had a sold-out show. It was a beautiful night. 50,000 people, and I couldn't wait. And before the show, someone from the promoter's office said, well, you must be very good tonight because the last time Bruce Springsteen played here, he cracked the foundation of the stadium. So you've got a lot to live up to. I was like, okay, no pressure. So I went back to my dressing room and had a couple drinks and ran on stage. We started playing the first song. The audience went wild. Best case scenario, go into the next song. And you know, those stadium stages they're big, they're tall and wide. So any movement, if you're going to run to this side of the stage, it's a good 50-yard dash. And then you got to run back to the microphone. So I turned to run to this side of the stage, and I trip over some cables. And I'm kind of doing this. I'm rolling up the windows, woo, woo, woo. And I saw that the lip of the stage was right in front of me. So I thought, well, I'll just jump. That'll look cool. That won't be embarrassing. I'm not falling, I'm jumping. And it was a good 12 feet, whatever it was. And I hit the ground so hard, felt no pain, just embarrassment. And I stood up, and my ankle was dislocated, and I'd broken this bone. So it was like a sack of mashed potatoes. There was nothing there. The most disgusting feeling. So I immediately sat down. The band can't see me because they're on stage. They're still playing our song. I look at my security guy. I'm like, I broke my fucking leg. Everything stops. Medics run up. The gurney comes out. I say, give me the microphone. And I say, hey, everybody, I just broke my leg. I'm going to go fix this, and I'll be right back. So I was out of my mind. I looked at the band. I said, play a Queen song. Just keep playing. They keep playing. The audience is like, what the fuck is going on right now? They pull me to the side. He takes off my shoe. My foot falls this way. He said, your ankle's dislocated. I got to put it back in right now. So he pushes it back in. I get a big cup of whiskey, and I ask him, okay, if I sit down, can I continue the show? He says, if I let go of your ankle, it's just going to fall out. And I said, well, then you're coming up on stage with me. And he sat in front of me and held my ankle and then put a brace on it. And, you know, we finished the show. And, yeah, we played for another 2.5 hours. And then I came here to London to have surgery. And we had 65 more shows on that trip. We designed this weird throne thing that I sat on, which had lasers and smoke, and you went around the stage. So in a way, it was my favorite tour I've ever done. And that was my favorite show we've ever played. Because it sort of proved to me and the band that no matter what, we could actually sort of push through obstacles and challenges. And it was about the perseverance and not how we do things, but why we do them,
That adrenaline rush that obviously kept the pain away for the duration of the show and probably disappeared sometime afterwards. But how does that compare to, I guess, the adrenaline rush that you would get on any night when you're performing? Are those two things sort of related for you?
Well, it's funny. As I was writing this book, I started to realize that I have a funny relationship with pain. I don't really feel physical pain as much as I feel emotional pain. And yeah, I mean, if you add some adrenaline to that type of disaster, you're fine until you're left alone on the couch with a cast and a warm beer, and you think, "Oh God, this hurts," and and it was a long recovery. But I think that when we get up to play shows, it's definitely adrenaline, but more than just physical adrenaline, it's the excitement and the pure joy of sharing that experience with so many people, because it really is the communal, tangible element of live music that's exciting and reassuring in a way. It's like, oh, we're all human beings, It's easy to think like the face on the TV or on the sound on the radio is coming from somewhere else, when really it's just another human being pouring their heart out to you. And so that's, I don't get nervous anymore to jump up on a stage. I just get excited for that feeling. And when it was taken away, when the pandemic hit, it was devastating. Like I really felt this void. Like how can I bring that joy back? How can I bring the joy to the people? How can I feel that connection again?
At the height of, I suppose, your fame with Foo Fighters, standing in front of those massive stadiums with those groups of people, you've sort of said, how did we get here? How did this actually happen? And reading your book, it's a really good question, because in your very first actual drum lesson, you discovered that you were actually holding the drumsticks the wrong way around. So how did you get from holding the drumsticks the wrong way to knowing so much about drumming and rhythm and music and all the rest of it?
Well, I learned everything by ear. So I took maybe a few guitar lessons just to figure out how to put my fingers on the chords, but I didn't want to become a classical guitarist. I wanted to play AC/DC songs. I wanted to play songs by the rock and roll bands that I loved, Ramones songs and things like that. No, I think I think about that almost every day. Like, how did I get here? What am I doing? Like, I wrote a book. Like, I've been in a band. I've played shows. But the drumming thing, I grew up in this really tiny house that wouldn't even fit a drum set. And so I would listen to albums and I could decipher or determine each piece of the drum set. Okay, that's the kick drum, that's the snare, that's the ride cymbal, these are the toms. And all I needed to do was figure out the physicality of how to put those things together to make a beat. And I would do that on pillows on the floor. And I had these like big marching sticks that I stole from a friend. They were really fat. And I would sit there and play along to my favorite records on pillows, which actually kind of, it almost ruined drumming for me, because when you're playing on pillows, there's no give. You're just hitting as hard as you can on something that's like running in the sand. So if I got to a drum set, I would just destroy the thing. I was just like beating it like Thor. Like, it was just out of my mind. But anyway, so my mother used to take me to this jazz club in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. Every Sunday they had this jazz workshop where there was a house band, and they would play a set. And then if you were a local musician, you could write your name down on a piece of paper and they'd call you up to jam with them. So we went on my mother's birthday one year, and she said, "You know what I want for my birthday? I want you to go play with the band." And this is jazz. Yeah. And I've been playing on pillows, punk rock records. So I was nowhere near in the same like bandwidth or universe as these guys, but I did it because it was my mother's birthday. And I realized that day, like, oh my God, I'm not a drummer. I'm just a fool with pillows, in his bedroom listening to punk rock records. So I asked the house drummer if he'd give me a lesson. He came over to the house and started playing. He sat down at the drum set, did some wicked solo, and then he said, "Let me see what you can do." And I kind of did my greatest hits of all the crap that I'd learned from listening to records. I think the first thing he said was, "Okay, first of all, you're holding your sticks backwards." And I don't know if I'd realized that. So he spun them around and had me on this practice pad just going right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right for $30 an hour. And I just thought, it's gonna cost $1 million for me to play like Lenny Robinson. So that's the only lesson I ever had.
You managed to work out how to play the drums then?
Well, here's the thing. I honestly think that in not having anyone tell me how to do it, what to do or what not to do, I kind of developed my own way of doing it. And I think with drumming, I appreciate and respect the technical and rudimental aspect of like proficiency. But to me, the most important thing is feel and a signature sound. So when you hear Charlie Watts, rest in peace, from the Rolling Stones, 20 seconds of him, like, oh, that's Charlie Watts, or that's Ringo Starr, or that's John Bonham, or that's Keith Moon. Whether any of those things are considered like rudimentally or technically correct shouldn't necessarily matter. It's whether the person's personality is coming out in their playing. And I hope that it does in mine. And I like to think that because no one like would slap my wrist with a ruler when I made a mistake, that it's those mistakes that 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 developed like some sort of signature sound.
You mentioned AC/DC, and you're a musical sort of omnivore. I can see from reading the book how many different types of music you have sort of gorged on. And there's a fantastic story which involves AC/DC, the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, and Paul McCartney. And it seemed to me a really clear indication of how wide your music taste is. But tell me a bit about how those three people or bands came together.
There was one year where I was asked to present an award at the Grammys, not to perform, just to present. And I kind of hate those after parties where it's like music industry and people wanting selfies and stuff. I was just like, yeah, man, let's just go have a dinner. So I called Pat, our guitarist, and our drummer Taylor, and I said, hey, why don't we like get the wives and we'll go to some nice restaurant. So we book a table. Paul McCartney was coming into town, and when he comes to Los Angeles, we usually say hello and have a dinner. And his wife texted my wife and said, what are you doing after the Grammys? She said, well, we're just going to go to this restaurant. And Nancy said, well, do you mind if we tag along? So my wife texts me and she says, hey, do you mind if Paul and Nancy come to dinner? I'm like, no, that'll be great. This will be fun. So now we've got 4 couples. Then Paul bumps into AC/DC in the lobby of the hotel or in the gym or something like that. And they say, well, what are you doing after the show? Because AC/DC was performing. Paul said, well, we're going out to dinner with Foo Fighters, guys. You want to come? So then I get a text from my wife. She says, hey, do you mind if AC/DC comes to dinner? Now, this was huge to me because I really was a huge AC/DC fan when I was young. And the thing about AC/DC is you never see them unless they're on stage. You know, it's not like you see them walking the carpet at a movie premiere. It's like the only time you see them, there's like walls of amplifiers and cannons and fucking explosions. And so to see them in the flesh, off stage, in the wild, I was like, this is going to be amazing. It blew my mind. It was such a huge deal. I was a huge fan and really influenced by them when I was young. They had a tour film called Let There Be Rock, and this is the first time I saw a rock and roll band with like no frills, just a few lights on stage. Then my friend Ben Jaffe from the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, which is a New Orleans swing band, legendary, says, what are you doing after the show? I'm like, oh my God, Ben, I'm having dinner with McCartney and AC/DC. You got to come. And he says, well, can I bring the whole band with me? There's like 10 of these guys. You know, they march like a marching band down streets, like in a parade, you know. It's my favorite type of music. I love New Orleans jazz so much. I love it so much. So I said, well, let me see if I can get a bigger table. And I booked the back room. And he said, if you want, we'll march down the street through the restaurant and into the room playing. I was like, this is going to be the greatest night of my life. So we kept it a secret. We didn't tell anyone. And we're all hanging out in this back room with AC/DC and Paul, and we're sort of sitting there. And then you could hear the music coming down the street. You could hear, and it's loud, dude. I mean, it's tubas and trombones and trumpets and bass drums coming through the restaurant into the room. And everybody's face is just like, what the fuck is going on right now? And I got to swing dance with AC/DC. It was insane. I mean, by the end of the night, I honestly, you know, as with a lot of the stories in this book, I just think like, I can't, this must be happening to someone else. It's like having an out-of-body experience. I'm just like, I can't believe this is my life. This is happening to me because I surely don't consider myself in the like lofty, godlike ranks or status of Paul or AC/DC. I still feel like a kid on my bedroom floor. But here I am, like, you know, getting high with the New Orleans Jazz Band and drinking whiskeys with AC/DC while, you know, Paul's dancing behind me. It's like, this is fucking awesome. It never grows old. You're just like, I can't fucking believe it. It's great.
Looking back, I hadn't realised, because it's the 30th anniversary, of course, of Nevermind, and I hadn't realised how short, actually, the career of that band was, how intense that whole experience was. And it sort of made, therefore, much more sense looking back on it. And you do talk about the shock of what happened with Kurt and how that affected you. But actually, you talk about another death that actually probably affected you more, which was that of your best friend, Jimmy.
Yeah.
And you talk often in the book about how your life flashes before your eyes sort of every day, that you're constantly revisiting moments, and that something like those griefs, those deaths, are things that you do still process as we're going on now.
Yeah, I mean, that chapter, that was actually the last piece I wrote for the book because I was kind of scared to write it. And so I'd written all these other things. Some of them were like deep and heavy emotional. Other were like light-hearted anecdotes and things. But I knew I had to write that part. And so to me, I knew what people wanted me to write. I knew what Nirvana fans wanted me to write. I knew what people might expect me to write. And I didn't want to write that. I thought, okay, maybe I'm just going to write about, to try to explain a much more broad piece about loss and mourning and how grief is determined or measured. Like, is it measured by time? Do you feel the loss of someone more if you've known them your entire life, or less if it's in such a short period of time? And I don't think time has anything to do with it. I think it has to do with the depth or the emotional relevance of that relationship. So, yeah, I mean, with Jimmy, my best friend, I'd known him since I was about 6 years old. We were inseparable. We were like Siamese twins. And I am very much who I am today because of him. And I really looked up to him. We were inseparable. We were best friends. And when he died of a drug overdose. When he died, like my life, there was just something huge was missing. It was the same with Kurt, even though we knew each other for a much shorter period of time. The life that we lived in those 3.5 years, I mean, that was almost a lifetime in itself. And so much had changed, and we were young, and it was just this crazy turning point in our lives. And because of everything that had happened in that 3.5 years, it hurt more, And I also talk about how there are some people in life that you sort of emotionally prepare yourself to lose. And so you kind of build these walls around your heart in some kind of like self-defense mechanism, or it's like being emotionally vaccinated, so that when so that you'll be immune to the pain. But it never works. It doesn't work that way. And there's no textbook or instruction manual on how to grieve or mourn the loss of someone. So as I was writing it, it was like I was figuring it out as I was writing it, and it was very therapeutic. And as I also say, like, I still carry these people with me everywhere I go, every day. Every time I go on stage, I'll think about these people. Every time I wake up in the morning, I think about these people. So even though they're not here with us, they're very much here with me.
One of the things that's clearly helped, I suppose, with dealing with that has been your family. And the way that you talk about your family in this book is really heartwarming. As the father of daughters, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that relationship, the extraordinary lengths that you have been to, like around the world twice for one of your daughters. But how has it been to sort of involve them in your life as a sort of rock star? Because obviously some might think those two things are really hard to bring together, but you clearly have.
I used to think that. I mean, first of all, when Nirvana became popular, my father said, this isn't going to last, right? This will not last. And I said, of course. Like, I thought it would only last a year or two, and then I'd have to go back to normal life. And I always imagined, like, I'd do this for a little while, it would end, and then I'd meet a nice girl, have family, get some sort of job, I suppose, and just right off into the sunset. But as the albums kept coming and the audiences got bigger and things kept going, I thought, wait a second, I might be in this for the long haul, And we went to this, we were invited to play at this benefit concert for Neil Young, whose child had cerebral palsy. And there was a school for kids who needed like an alternative learning. And the first night of the Bridge School benefit, you would go to Neil's house for dinner. And I expected it to be this like really fancy rock star catered event. He lives in like a redwood castle in the middle of the forest in California. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's like part Swiss Family Robinson, it's part Harry Potter, but it's 8 1,000 acres or something to himself. He lives in this like valley. And we got there and we knocked on the door, and I look and I open the door and I see his wife like in the kitchen cutting vegetables. And then I look over here and I see another family and and I started to realize, oh, these things can coexist. You just have to make it work. And, you know, I think most people have this idea that music and rock and roll is really all lasers and dragons and private planes and champagne. And it is sometimes. Like, the other part of it is, you know, I'll go like blow up a stadium for 3 hours and you just feel like Zeus, you know, you're like, yeah, this is what. And then I'm up at 6 a.m. packing lunches and driving my kids to a bus stop in a minivan. And that's real. That's how it works. And I love that about it. I think it's what balances the whole thing and it keeps you going. And, you know, with kids, I also write a little bit about it. You know, I think one of the reasons why musicians love their children so much is because you spend so much of your time showered with this superficial love, right? People tell you, I love you, you're a legend, you're a genius, like things like that. Feels pretty good, but it's kind of like a sugar high. It wears off really quick and you just kind of crash. So then you begin to question love. Like, does this person love me, or do they love like the thing? Do they love me, or do they love the guitar? Like, what is it? You don't have to question that love with a child. Like with my kids, it's like, oh, they love me. Like, I'm their fucking dad. And if they think I'm cool, it's because I'm their dad. Honestly, they could give a shit about all this other stuff. They happen to think it's quite boring. And so, you know, so I think that of course, as I love being a dad. I really do. I love being a father. I have great kids. They're all smart and weird and eccentric and polite and fun. And so if I have time away from this, I want it to be with them. And yes, I would fly around the world twice, just have a few hours with them. And I've done it more than once.
So if anyone who has ever watched you on YouTube telling a story will know that you are an excellent storyteller. There are so many in this book, and I could talk to you all day about them, but I won't, because we want to leave something. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, man. That's fun.